There we go.
Beautiful. So did you always drink whiskey, or did you switch it on up and did you drink beers and whatnot? Was whiskey always your interest?
No, it wasn't always my interest. It was definitely something I'd say I developed more of a taste for as I got older. I think I worked as a tour guide in a distillery back up in Speyside when I was home for the summer from university. And it was during that time when I worked there that you're talking about it every day. You're talking about how you make the product, so that you then spark that little bit of interest. Well, what does it actually taste like? So you start to try it there, and that was probably my sort of like first interaction with whiskey and actually tasting it. And I definitely say it's developed since then.
That's super cool. So did you find yourself wanting to work in the whiskey field from being that tour guide?
Definitely, yeah. It was an absolutely fantastic job. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I worked there for 2 summers. And it was a fantastic job. I loved talking about whiskey, and the people that I worked with as well were a fantastic team. And I wouldn't necessarily say I went out with the intention of getting a career in that area. It kind of fell in that direction, but I'm really glad that it did. And I've worked in the whiskey industry now for 10 years. And yeah, I've loved every second of it.
You're a decade-old veteran in the whiskey industry. There you go. Perfect. And from what I understand, that you said university, you majored in forensics in university, and that brought me down a wild path as I correlate forensics with CSI and investigation cop shows. So your investigation was towards Scottish whiskey. So if you could tell us about your role that you did in university and post-university with that, because I thought that was super cool.
Yeah, so that's typically what people think when you tell them that you studied forensics at university. They're a bit like, oh, so why do you not work for the police? Or they imagine all these ideas of CSI and things like that. And I definitely admit it was definitely television programs that really sparked my interest in that area. That sort of like investigating, trying to understand how things happened or why things happened. That really sparked my interest and led me to going on to study that. Whilst at university, as well as doing all the interesting things associated with forensics, there was also a lot of the fundamentals of it are based in science, a lot of chemistry and biology in there. And it was really pulling on that chemistry and biology element that then led me into the other roles that I did. So my first role that I did after leaving university was a job working for a company called the Scotch Whisky Research Institute. It's here in Scotland, through in the capital in Edinburgh. Now, the Scotch Whisky Research Institute is an independent company. It's member-based, and basically what they do is they do research into the whole Scotch whisky production process, trying to gain a better understanding of Scotch whisky flavour and improve and optimises the processes that we use within the industry. And I actually started off there working very much as a scientist, and it was that scientific fundamentals that I learned at university that got me that role, piled together with the knowledge of the whiskey industry that I'd got from being a tour guide in a distillery as well. So it was really the two of those things coming together. Whilst I worked there, the first job that I did was very analytical based. So I worked in a lab. It was lots of instruments measuring the levels of different compounds that we find in whiskey. And then from that, it progressed more into a research role. So within that research role, I did a lot of work into understanding the role of fermentation and distillation, and specifically what impacts these part of the process could have on flavour. And tied in with all that, I also headed up the sensory panel at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute as well. So I looked after our panel of nosers and all the different sensory tests that we did with that panel of nosers as well. And it was actually during my time when I first started at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute that I first had my nose tested for the ability to smell things and also describe what you smell. Because that's one of the key things actually that we look for when we're talking about sensory assessment. It's not only that you can smell things, but that you can describe what you can smell as well. Because you can imagine how important that is. You know, when you're talking to consumers or the trade or bartenders or anything like that, when you're talking about a product or a whiskey, you're talking about the flavours that you get in it. So it's really good that not only are you able to pick those up, but you're able to communicate what you get as well.
So how did you find out that it was Colonel Mustard in the study with the Glenrothes 18.
Yeah, definitely a lot of investigating and research work, and a lot of research work is that it's carrying out experimental type work, investigating things. Why is this happening? What is the result of carrying out this particular process and things like that? And yeah, I still very much probably carry that through in what I do in my day-to-day job now.
For sure. And the new investigation for today is that Tom and I are going to go to the brand team for Clue, featured around our Scottish whiskey, because I want to play that game right now. That would be so much fun. That's super interesting, man, because it's like everyone talks about how whiskey is produced, and you hear so many different stories, and that is one of the most unique ones that I've heard. You're a scientist and you're making this through a scientific method. It's not just listening to Whitesnake and slamming back whiskey. There's actual. It's crazy to use your education in that field, and obviously by the product, it benefited from it. But that's a super cool path. That's really fun.
Yeah, and that's one of the great things about the Scotch whisky industry as a whole, is all the effort that goes on in the background, to all the effort that goes into understanding the product, understanding the process to make it as good as we can, constantly thinking about what we've learned from the past and what we can do as we go into the future as well.
Amazing. So now with your research and going through that and having your nose tested and all these different things, was this the path that you saw yourself going down? Did you know that you wanted to become a master blender? And how does one become a master blender anyway?
In terms of becoming a master blender, most people that I know within the industry that have the title of master blender normally have some sort of scientific background there. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about the art and the science, and I would definitely say it as a combination of both of those elements coming together. There's so much to do with the science element about the understanding of flavour that's really important for a master blender, and it's very much something that develops over time. I'm sure there's many people who wish they could go on a course and do a week-long course, and fantastic, they could be a master blender at the end of it. But it's never quite as simple as that. A lot of it is about experience. It's about nosing lots of different whiskey samples, just getting that experience, knowing what the different extremes that they are, the different cask types, the different distilleries. And the only way that you'll ever be able to build up that huge bank of knowledge and that huge understanding of the impact of the process is to get your nose in glasses and get nosing whiskies. So it's definitely something that builds up over time. People often start in different areas of the industry and then move their way up through the industry. And that's very much what I've done. As I say, starting more within that scientific and research role, taking all the knowledge that I had there and that I consistently learned during my time there. And then when I got the opportunity, when the job arose at Edrington, and I actually applied for it, wasn't something that I was necessarily thinking about at the time. But then once the opportunity presented itself and I actually really started to think a little bit more in depth about my career and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do, in my head, it definitely made sense. And at the time when I joined Edrington, I would probably even have been slightly unsure as to say if I was quite ready for that. I very much questioned myself and the knowledge that I had, and if it was enough to move into the production role that was being offered. But starting with Edrington as a trainee blender, I then moved up through the position of assistant blender as well before taking on responsibility for the Naked Grouse. And all during that time, I've worked very closely with the blending team in Glasgow, particularly closely with Kirstine Campbell and Gordon Motion, and previously Max McFarlane, who's now retired from the company, but all people who together have a huge wealth of experience, and it's learning from them that's really taken me right through that journey and given me all the knowledge that I need to be where I am today.
Yeah, I've heard that guy Gordon mentioned here or there. He's he knows a little bit about whiskey. That's a super cool Rolodex for people that you're learning from as well. That's pretty epic. So 10 years experience coming into this, and you were a trainee then for 3 years with Edrington, right?
Yep.
So yep. That's a long time for a training program as well. That's that's a lot of patience for a trainee.
And it's all that way. It, to me, it almost didn't even feel like 3 years either, because there's so much to learn and you're constantly learning something new, little elements about the process. There's always something new and to learn that's just going to arm you, and something that just builds up that bank of knowledge that's always going to help you going forward. And even now, with the position and the responsibility for looking after Naked, you know, talking to other people in the liquid quality team that I work alongside, I still learn something new every day, and I probably will do for many, many years to come. It's great to work as part of the team that I do, because as I say, there's so much to learn, and they're great guys for learning from as well.
Absolutely. And I'm sure it's the same as high up as where you're at, actually creating the process, because I still feel the same way about my role. Just going out into the market every day, you learn something new every day in this business.
Yeah.
You know, who knew that the world needed peanut butter whiskey and it was going to be a home run? It just happens. But that's really cool. So being around all those and tasting all these different spirits, and this doesn't have to be brand friendly at all. What's the finest spirits that you have tried?
Well, within the Edrington portfolio, we do have some pretty spectacular things to choose from.
One or two.
And working in the sample room is an absolute honour, to work at the bench and to see so many of these samples as final products passing before us. But there's also some very unique things that we do get to see as well. So obviously, a lot of individual casks that are maybe going towards a blend. You know, often it's when we're blending at the bench and you're nosing something and it's maybe lined up to go into a product, but you actually nose it and you think, that's far too good to be lost in a blend. We're going to take that out and savour it, and that's going to become a single cask or something like that. So we do get to see so many great things coming across the bench. Moving away from our own brand products, I have had an opportunity to try an exceptional whisky actually. I was, a couple of years ago when I worked at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute, I was asked as part of that job to present a small festival that they have up in Speyside, called the Spirit of Speyside Whisky Festival, that they normally hold each year. Attracts a lot of tourists to the area. Obviously, people come to learn more about whisky. You often get access to a lot of the distilleries that don't normally allow visitors. So it's a great place for people to come and soak up whisky knowledge during a sort of like week-long festival. And they do a bit of a whisky school at the beginning of it. And I was asked to do a presentation on sensory and new make spirit. And it just so happened that I was placed in the programme after a guy called Graham Unson that works for Tomatin Distillery. And he brought with him an array of different samples, and he was talking about maturation and the impact of the cask on flavour. And he was talking quite specifically about how casks, and you know, you get whiskey that's been matured in a cask for a really long time, and you can sometimes get this really intense flavour coming through. But this one had been in a refill cask that had been used a few times before, I think, but had sat in that cask for a long period of time. And the flavours that came through in it were absolutely exceptional. I can't remember the year of it. I can't even remember the cask type, apart from that it was a refill cask, but it was a Tomatin whiskey, and it was one of the most delicious whiskies I've ever had.
So you just put your skills to test of explaining a flavor and nailed it, because I want that. I want two of them actually. I also learned something new today, which I'm kind of embarrassed to admit, but I called it Tomatin. Yeah, how about that?
There's probably lots of distilleries up in Speyside that the pronunciation of the distilleries will vary, whoever you talk to.
So when I first started as a sales rep in this business, probably, what is that now? 7 years ago now, I believe. It was my first month, and we had just launched this new single malt whiskey. And my manager, who was amazing, Rob Maltese, he's like, listen, man, use this. It's good product. Go out there, make relationships, meet some people. You're not being held for anything. Just go out there and try to make some friends. I'm like, okay, cool. So I go out and I actually get 25 placements. And it was one of my first months. And he's like, oh, this is awesome, man. Let's go out. Let's bust this. So cool. We go out. And I'm telling him like how I was explaining the brand, how I sold it on in, yada, yada, yada. Get to the first bar. And I was like, what's up, man? We'll have 2 crack-a-lackies.
knew that was the one you were going to say.
The bartender goes, and Rob looks at you, he's like, what did you just say? Our product, the one that was on the MBO this month, Crackalacky. He's like, Craigellachie guy, Craigellachie. Yeah, we don't do much Gaelic or Scottish names in Brooklyn, so I had to learn a little bit.
Well, the village that I grew up in is actually about 5 minutes away from Craigellachie, so it's one that I know very well.
It was fantastic. I really enjoyed that one. But that's a cool. But the tomaten,
Yeah.
the tomaten sounded lovely. So when we're doing our consumer sampling events, whether it be in a store or in a restaurant, we talk about cleaning your palate and having the best sense possible, not to have anything that's interrupting your nose. That could clash with the whiskey. Do you have a practice that you follow when you are tasting this whiskey to make a blend?
Yeah, there's definitely some rules that we abide by, and we very much encourage anyone else within our business who might be coming along to carry out a bit of a sensory assessment for us. Within Edrington, we've got a wider sensory panel that we can use to carry out some sensory for us. And we really try and encourage all of our panelists to come along to do that, to follow these guidelines. One of them is just to be very aware of the types of foods and drinks that you're having before you come along to do your sensory. So a big one for me is not drinking coffee in the morning if I'm going straight into work to be nosing some samples. General awareness of strong flavoured foods, things that have got like onions, strong curry flavours or anything like that, because these are the sorts of things that can sort of linger in your mouth for a long time afterwards. One of the other things though as well is even just the handling of food and the fact that you can have smells lingering on your fingers for a long time afterwards. And one of the ones I find is oranges. Like if you peel an orange, you get that lovely orange peel coming out, but it goes all over your fingers and it's really hard to shift. So then maybe when you pick up a glass in the afternoon, you think, oh, that smells really citrusy, but actually you're smelling the orange that you had at lunchtime and not what's in your glass. So these are things that we definitely are very, very aware of. We're also really conscious and we have quite strict rules in the sample room around wearing perfume or aftershave, strong scented products like that, and hand creams as well. These are the sorts of things that they can linger in the air, obviously perfumes and things like that. In fact, I now am so out of the habit of wearing perfume that I have a huge collection of perfume because I never wear it to work now. So it's definitely a special occasion if I'm putting the perfume on. And hand creams and things like that. As I say, you've got the real danger once you've put hand cream on your own hands. Not only can you smell it on your own hand, but you can transfer it onto glasses and other surfaces as well that people might touch.
That's another message that we have to get across to the brand team. Naked Grouse cologne. That would be fun. It'd be really tough if you get pulled over. No, officer, it's my cologne. But
there has been a few days, I sometimes have the odd very clumsy day in the sample room where I'll knock over lots of samples, and by the end of the day, your t-shirt's definitely drenched in a little bit of whiskey. You're sitting in your car on the way home and you think to yourself, I hope I don't get pulled over today.
It's be a tough one to explain.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, Naked Grouse cologne is just Naked Grouse, just a little dab of the good stuff behind the ears. You don't need a whole other thing. It does that.
That's so on brand that I'm embarrassed I've even thought about making a Naked Grouse cologne. Well played, TJ. Well played. So whiskey terminology can get super complicated. And whether it be for Scottish whiskey or American bourbon, it can get a little intimidating for people as well. So the exact definition of blend whiskey is a combination of barrel-aged malt whiskey, barley, and some quantity of grain whiskey, something other than barley. What is the difference between malt whiskey and grain whiskey?
Okay, so malt whiskey is made from, first of all, 100% malted barley as the cereal substrate that's used to make it. It then goes through the process in the distillery where it is mashed together with water. It goes through the fermentation using yeast. There are no extra enzymes or anything added to the process for Scotch whisky. Some other Scotch whiskies will allow you to add enzymes in the process here, but not for Scotch. It all has to be natural, coming from these ingredients that we're using. And then typically your distillation will take place in your copper pot stills. In Scotland, it's normally a double distillation, but there are a couple of distilleries here in Scotland that'll do a triple distillation, but triple distillation tends to be a bit more related to Irish whiskey. You'll see most Irish whiskies are triple distilled.
Yep.
When we talk about grain whiskey though, as a substrate, we still use a small percentage of malted barley, and we need that to get the natural enzymes into the process. But we tend to use a higher proportion of unmalted cereal. And in Scotch whisky, it's typically wheat or maize that's used as that unmalted cereal. They'll again go through a process of mashing and fermentation, but the distillation process again very much differs in grain whisky production, and that it takes place in column stills, or you'll often hear them being talked about the coffee stills. Again, big differences. Malt distilleries, although there's many more of them, they're on a much smaller scale. Grain distilleries produce on a much bigger scale, many, many millions of litres, and they're also not quite as pretty to look at as a lot of the lovely little malt distilleries that you see in the images. Because of the style of distillation, in a grain whisky, they distill it to a much higher strength. So it's distilled up to around about 94% in strength. And because of that and the style of distillation it carries out, we say that grain whisky is slightly less complex than malt whisky. And once you mature it, a lot of people often say because it's less complex, it's sometimes a bit easier to drink, especially if you're new to drinking whisky. So it just tends to be a bit lighter in character than some of the richer, more complex flavours that you'll find in a malt. So that gives you malt whisky and grain whisky. And coming back to your question there about blended Scotch, Scotch whisky, I now find they've recently, within the legal definition of Scotch whisky, they've laid it out as having 5 different categories of Scotch whisky, which I find really simple to explain. First of all, you've got single grain whisky, which is the product of an individual grain distillery. You've got blended grain whisky, which is you've got grain whisky from more than 2 distilleries coming together and being blended. You've then got your single malt whisky, the output of a single malt distillery, something like Macallan, Glenrothes or Highland Park. You then get your blended malt whisky, which is when you take 2 or more whiskies from different malt distilleries and blend them together. And that's the category that Naked Grouse falls into. And then you've got your blended Scotch, and that's when we bring malt and grain together to give us blended Scotch whisky.
Awesome. So we're just a step higher of other blended whiskeys.
We are indeed, yes.
Look at that. Look at that. That is fantastic. So Naked being a blend, we're utilizing something different, and those more complex flavors that come from a malt is going into the Naked Grouse.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And complex could be an interesting word as well. And speaking on behalf of the on-premise and for bartenders that are in the on-premise, consistency is key, right? I'm here in New York City, so you go to every bar on the corner, whether it be an Irish pub or super mixology joint, and everyone's going to make a Manhattan, but they're all going to be different, right? And people are going to come back to the places that are better, and that's because of consistency. Your job is all about consistency, and you're taking that method and you're putting it up to a whole nother level, as it's not one Manhattan and it's an entire brand going across the entire world. So one, what type of anxiety medication are you on for that? Because I get palpitations just thinking about it. And how do you ensure the flavor profile is the same way every time?
So yeah, it's definitely a big responsibility. But the great thing with Naked Grouse and the fact that I've, as part of the team since joining Edrington 3 years ago, I've worked with the people that have produced Naked in the past. So therefore, I've got a really good understanding of how it's brought together. And it's that level of organisation that we have to put into it and the understanding of it. And as you say, it ultimately comes down to consistency, and it comes down on my shoulders to make sure that each bottle of grouse that you try, whenever you buy it, is going to taste the same as when you've tasted it before. So there's a lot of things that we put in place to ensure that. And quality is a huge part of what we do, not just for Naked Grouse, but within the whole of the Edrington portfolio. So the different malts that go into Naked Grouse, we're checking them at the new make spirit stage. So before they've even touched a cask to start bringing in flavour from the wood there.
That's super cool.
Spirit at that new make spirit stage. What we're also doing as well is monitoring the flavour as it goes through. So when we're bringing the different malts together after they've had that period of maturation, we're going to assess these, and again, it's checking that the flavours are there that you expect to find. So depending on the distillery that it's come from, depending on the type of cask that it's been matured in, you'll have a good idea of the types of flavour that you can expect to see coming together there. We also then, once we blend it, we'll fill it into the first full naked casks for its period of extra maturation. We nose each of the casks before we fill the whisky into them. Now those casks as well are really carefully controlled. Edrington have got a really great position that they work very closely with the cooperages and bodegas in Spain that supply our casks. So we can ensure really, really closely that the casks that we have coming in are meeting the specifications that we require to create the flavours that we're trying to create in our products. We then fill our naked into these first full sherry casks and leave it for 6 months. And we then nose that liquid again as it comes out of those casks after that 6 months maturation. And then again, as we go into the latter stages of the process, when we're finally blending all these casks together again, before they go through the filtration process, we're checking at every stage of the process. So really that level of quality that we have there by checking all the way throughout the process ensures that we're going to get that consistency batch to batch.
That's a pretty epic process. And when I'm in market and I tell you guys best bang for your buck in the Scotch category, can we just replay that 40 times when you XY? That is certainly a lot of 10, 11 care throughout that process. It's awesome that you start out from the new make spirit too. That is so cool.
Yeah.
That's so what flavor profile characteristics are you looking for in all of those? Like what is the essence of the Naked Grouse? What are you looking for in the new make spirit throughout the sherry cask harmonization, throughout the nose of it? Like what's that base flavor characteristic that you're looking for?
So when it comes to creating naked, we obviously have a blend of different malts that are coming together. Now, in each of the malts that we use, you're looking for the specific character from the distilleries that you're using. So in some elements, you're going to be looking to bring in things that have maybe got quite a light and fruity character. You might then look also to be bringing in a malt that's got something a bit heavier to it, a bit of a cereal character coming in round about it as well. You've also got to think about different distilleries that might be a bit of a green character coming into the malt, and it's playing with all these different flavours and making sure you get the right balance. Now remember, everything that we put into Naked is going to have an impact on its flavour, and with that I kind of like to compare it to a recipe that you might use for cooking in the kitchen. You know, when you're making food over the cooker, over the stove, you're not going to put something into it that isn't going to have an impact on the flavour of it. And that's the same when it comes to making whiskey. Everything that we put in, every distillery make that we use is contributing something to it. So we're going to make sure that we're using that array of different flavours in the new make spirit stage. And then we're using whiskey that have been filled into different cask types. So for example, we'll be using a proportion of, to make the initial blend, we'll be using a proportion of whiskey that's been matured in refill casks. Now within refill, you can get a variation in terms of quality. You can get a refill cask that's only ever been used once before, but you might have a refill cask that's maybe been used 2 or 3 times before. So you'll get a variation in the character you get from these different cask types. But in each of them, you'll be looking to still have an element of the new make spirit coming through, because it's really important to understand that that new make spirit is having an impact on the flavour. Although we talk about so much of the flavour coming from the wood, if that new make spirit wasn't contributing something itself, then we'd all just be using the same base spirit and filling it into casks. But everything's contributing something. As I say, refill casks, again, themselves can create a variation in terms of flavours. We also use first fill casks as well. Typically, these will be ex-sherry casks. Some of those sherry cask. Some of those will be European wood, and some of it will be American wood as well. Again, each which bring their own flavours into it. Then we'll blend all those matured malts together to make our initial blend, and they then get filled into these first fill sherry casks. Now we call them naked casks, and the reason we call them naked casks is because they've never held whiskey before. They've only been seasoned with sherry. Now, because they've never held whiskey before, that means there's a whole range of different flavours that are still in that cask ready for our whiskey to take out of them. So as I say, they will all have been seasoned with sherry. Some of them will be made of the American wood, and that American wood tends to give us some of the sweeter vanilla type flavours that you'll see coming through. Vanilla, some fruity flavours in there as well. But we also use a smaller proportion of European sherry casks. Now, the European wood will give us a bit of different elements and flavour. From this type of wood, we tend to get those richer, spicy, dried fruit character coming through from these casks. So that, again, is bringing in a different element of flavour. And it's this real balance between the American and European sherry casks, the first fill ones, that we fill our whiskey into to give it that period of extra maturation. It does give us a lot of flavour coming through in naked. Because they're first fill, they've never held whiskey before. They're in there for roughly 6 months for that extra maturation period. And although it seems quite a short period of time in comparison to the length of time that a lot of whiskey spends in cask, because the casks are so new, there's a lot of activity happening in the cask. We get great flavour delivery from that 6 month time period.
That's super cool. And are you getting more from the European in that short period of time because it's more porous, or does it not matter? Are you just for that small period of time, does it not matter the style of it? I know American's more dense, European is more porous.
They will vary in terms of exactly the extractives that you get coming through from the wood during that time. But again, it's consistency that you're talking about. So you always want it to be a 6 month period. So for example, because the casks are so active at that stage, if I left a batch of naked grouse in cask for maybe say 9 months instead of 6, you could see quite a difference in that character. But we make sure that sort of every batch of naked grouse has got the sort of equivalent levels of American and European input, so we get that same flavours coming through in the next batch as well.
Super cool. So it sounds like there's a lot that goes into this, and your calendar probably destroys mine as I'm trying to work on my time management. But I'm curious to know what your workflow looks like. Are you out researching the product you're going to be using? Are you in the lab crunching numbers? I mean, I said what I would be doing would be in the warehouse, like blaring Mr. Brightside and just slamming whiskey, saying, put that in, which is my number one request for when bars are fully up and running. I want to hear Mr. Brightside. I like that one. But what's your workflow schedule look like?
Excuse me. So the majority of my time is spent in the sample room. So I'm based at our site here in Glasgow, where we do the blending and bottling of naked grouse and other products within the Edrington portfolio. So at Great Western Road, we have a sample room that is dedicated to all things nosing and tasting whiskey. It's a fantastic room to work in. I just love the atmosphere in there. You're surrounded by samples all the time. But that's where the bulk of my time is spent. And it's simply because so much of what we do is nosing samples at the bench. It's very difficult to do that type of work from home. And that's definitely been one of the challenges that we've seen during the whole situation that we find ourselves in at the moment. I'm very, very fortunate indeed that I have been able to continue working throughout the time, but I've very much had to adapt the way of how I work. So for 2 months from the initial lockdown period that we went into, for the first 2 months I worked from home. So that meant that I didn't have any whiskey samples at my disposal. So it was a lot more desk-based work. But from what I've just told you, you can see there's a lot of elements that need to be sort of balanced in the background of things. So we can work on these things as well. So, things like, and a lot of it, again, is coordinating with different departments. So in terms of the new make spirits that we use in our malts, we don't only use malts from within the Edrington portfolio, we do trade with third parties in malts as well. So there's contracts that we need to consider there as well. So we're in conversation with departments about that. We're looking at getting samples drawn in wherever we're getting any of this new make spirit delivered. So there's assessment of these samples as well. We're looking at talking with the cask supply team as well about the casks that we need for the year. We've always got to be thinking ahead, because we've got to think these casks are in Spain. We need to get them brought over to Scotland and fitted into the busy operations plan that we have at Great Western Road. We need to think about when these casks are being filled, and then very carefully plan when they're being emptied as well, so that we're catching them just at that sort of optimum 6-month time period. And then there's so many other things as well on top of that. At the moment, we are working with fewer members of the team at the moment. The furlough system that they have in place here in the UK at the moment means that they're reducing the numbers of people that are working on site pretty much to the bare minimum that we require. So at the moment, it's requiring me to pick up a lot of other things as well that wouldn't normally necessarily be on my workload. But it's great because it really gives you that balance. And even out with all the situation that we're in at the moment, we actually work as part of the team at Great Western Road. We work across other brands as well. So although I'm the master blender for Naked Grouse and the responsibility of creating that liquid lies on my shoulders, I do nose other products like Glenrothes products and Highland Park products, and the famous Grouse as well at the bench. The Macallan does tend to be done by the Macallan team up at the distillery itself, because of the size of the Macallan brand and the number of products they have there. The blending is done at the distillery itself, but we do still see a lot of Macallan samples coming across the bench from the later stage of the process. But as I say, we're seeing samples from all the other brands as well. So it really gives you a great variety, but the bulk of the time is spent at the bench, which is a good place to be.
That sounds like an absolutely fantastic place to be. And I'm sure that many of people would trade their 9 to 5 on over to be on that bench as well. That sounds absolutely epic. So yeah, that's how many people are in that tasting room at a given time in real operation, not throughout what we're going through right now.
Liquid quality as a whole is kind of split into 2 areas. So we've got the lab team who do a lot of the analytical measurements. So they look at measuring the strength and the colours on any of our products, and they do a lot of other research work in the background as well. And then we've got the sample room team. And the sample room team is now made up of 6 of us. We recently expanded the team quite a bit, just because we simply needed the resource within the team, because there's so much for us to do. And the continuous drive that we have to understand the quality of the whisky and the quality of the whisky that's going to be coming through on the bench in the next few years to come. We're really keen to have a good grasp on that and be prepared for what's coming across soon. So we've got Gordon Motion, who's our master whisky maker for Highland Park. We've got Laura Rampling, who joined the team at the beginning of the year, who's the master whisky maker for Glenrothes. We now have Callum Fraser, who's the master blender for Famous Grouse. We have Emma Whitelaw, who's a trainee blender with the team. And we also have our sample room assistant, Angela Dewar, as well. And all play a crucial role in terms of what we're doing within the sample room. Lots of different stages of the process. People, Emma, as a trainee, that's where I started off when I joined Edrington as well. So lots of learning to do there. But it's great for her to get hands-on at the bench, because as I say, that's how we do most of our learning when it comes to sensory here. But one of the downsides of the situation we're in at the moment is things like sharing glasses has really put paid to a lot of that possibilities that we have, where we would normally share glasses and ask for other people's opinions on things all the time, and constantly passing these around. That's really sort of dampened that down at the moment, and we're not able to do things quite as easily.
It's so crazy, just the levels that this stuff has touched, and someone that goes into a liquor store that wouldn't even think of, like, oh, that entire process is stopped because of what we're going through in the world. It's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy.
Absolutely.
Though I would gladly exchange Highland Park 50 with anybody. So given the times or not, pass it over, man. Let's do this. But that's really cool. It sounds like a really awesome close-knit team as well. That's seeing each other every single day and having the most of your time being there. That's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, Absolutely, and we work very closely as well with the team that we have at Macallan Distillery as well. The team of whiskey makers, and they've got a sample room assistant there as well. You know, we've got to sort of keep in close contact around a lot of things, because as I say, although they're blending Macallan at the distillery, we also then see those samples coming down to Great Western Road here in Glasgow. So it's really important, again, that we have that great communication, that we're using similar practices in what we're doing as well. You know, there's so much to learn and knowledge to pass across between both teams as well.
And it says a lot about your team and the Macallan team as well, in terms of our portfolio strength and why all of the products in our portfolio are absolutely delicious and taste so good. So where someone else might be distilling it, and there's different ways of creating it and different distilleries, when it comes across that floor, we have some super talented people putting it all together and putting the ones and twos on it to make sure that it is the perfect way. So that's some cool insider information there. Now, in terms of Naked Grouse, are you creating that in batches?
Yeah. So we do tend to create Naked in batches, simply because in terms of when we take the initial blend of malts and fill it into those first fill casks, for us, in order to be able to control that time period of 6 months, we tend to sort of like fill maybe one batch in a month, and then we know 6 months later in the plan we're emptying that batch out again. So yeah, we do tend to make them in batches, but then what we do is, when it comes to the bottling stage, is because you might see very minor variations from batch to batch, as much as it is my job to do and to make each of those batches the same, you will find there can be very minute differences between the batches. So what we can do is we'll start to blend a couple of the batches together to create a new batch that will go forward for bottling. You'll tend to find that that just balances out any small nuances that you might see between the different batches.
Consistency is king.
Exactly. Everything we can to make it as consistent as possible.
Absolutely. And how many casks would you say that you're sampling for each batch?
So because we sample at multiple stages of the process, to create the initial blend within a batch, you could probably nose around 250 casks. And then we nose the casks themselves that are about to be filled, which in a batch is normally about 160 first fill casks. And then we nose each of those casks again once they've had the 6 months maturation period, before we blend all those casks together. So there's quite a few different stages in the process, and what's really important, and one of the things that I think is absolutely fantastic about Edrington's quality, level of quality, is the fact that we nose every single cask that goes into our products. So there's not scope that you're going to accidentally miss something, that you're only nosing a portion of the product or a percentage of the casks that are going into your blend. We are nosing every single cask that goes into our product.
That's super impressive. That's extraordinary, actually. That's amazing. And I was going to ask you about, and you pretty much answered all my questions about the cask and whatnot, where they're coming from, European, American, and the biggest difference is that 6 months is in sherry, and
Yeah.
there's not many other brands that do that, correct?
No, there's not many.
No, and
Certainly
that's
within our category that we sit within.
absolutely. And it's pretty cool that you are seeing the cask even before the whiskey goes into it. So it's not just like, take these, see what you can do with them. No, you guys you're doing your research, and you know what's going to come across your table and what they're going to be aged in, right?
Absolutely. We've got guys whose job, they're based out in Spain, and they go around the cooperages and the bodegas that we use in Spain to ensure that they're building casks to the requirements that we want. And then once we bring the casks over here to Scotland, as I say, we do nose them before we fill them. And one of the key reasons for that is simply because we know sometimes that casks, they can develop off notes in them if they're left exposed to the atmosphere. So what we simply do is it's something that's reasonably quick to do, but it's a very easy way that you could quite simply avoid filling a cask with whiskey that's going to cause it to go off. You can very easily stop that from happening and make sure that you actually fill that liquid into a good quality cask. and then that saves that cask that you're filling going to waste. And as I say, something that's so easy to do, to stick your nose over a cask and just check that there's nothing unpleasant there.
Excellent. It's so wild to hear this. I mean, again, like we get our brand plans and we read it and we, but just to have someone verbally walk you through this and understand exactly it clicks in your mind in a different way and re-registers, like, wow, that's a process. But I mean, the proof is in the bottle, right? You see all that hard work in the liquid, and it is fantastic. Unfortunately, we could not get a bartender today that was able to make it, but I've been enjoying some super fun naked cocktails throughout quarantine, and I based my logo for my quarantine cocktails thing off of naked. So I'll show you what that is. I also wore my No Shoes Nation because that was the closest thing I would get. So Kenny Chesney would like naked too when he's not drinking Blue Bay rum. But so obviously the flavor is coming from these three malts, and the malted barley specifically has a lot more flavor than other grains. And the oak is tremendous and super important. So we have two different styles of oak, in the American and the European, both touching sherry and then being finished and married inside sherry seasoned casks. But something that we've learned is that terroir plays a big play as well, and where this stuff is coming from. So are they coming from all over Scotland? Do you realize that specific regions taste better? Is Speyside that much better? Is Islay that much better? What would you say in terms of the regions of Scotland of where these blends are coming make the most sense for a product like Naked?
I think it's all about getting the balance right. So everything, as I mentioned earlier, everything contributes something different to it. So I think it's great that you have a combination of these different flavors coming into Naked Grouse to give you that balance of different flavors. So yeah, I definitely think it's great, to have a variation of different regions coming together to give Naked that balance and flavor. It's predominantly Speyside and Highland dominated, I would say would be the regions that make up the bulk of the malts that are going into it. But as I say, we're using everything because it's contributing a flavour that we want in it.
Cool. And with that, if I were to bring my friends a bottle of Maker's Cut, a bottle of Magnus, or a bottle of Rare Cask, they would be very judgmental towards me because they feel like I get some good whiskey, and they'd be like, how old is this stuff? But what we've been trying to say is that age really doesn't matter in terms of whiskey. And we have 6 people in the Zoom right now, and I'm sure that we have plenty more that are on Facebook, but we would ask who's the most mature. And Margaret Gray gave me that little bit of info, and I've loved it. And her saying it is a lot more romantic and beautiful and perfect than me saying it. But it's her wording, it was great. But I would just love to know how you feel about age statements, and is it as big of a deal as we make them out to be?
No, it's the simple answer.
That was great. At the end of the day, no.
I definitely think that people do tend to get very hung up on age statements. People that see a product that doesn't have an age statement often jump to the conclusion that it automatically means that it's a very young product. And from my knowledge of how various different products in our portfolio are made, that is not always the case. But even if you step away from the fact of age statements altogether, there's so much, you can fill a spirit into a first fill cask and have it in there for a very short period of time and get some fantastic colour and flavour coming through from it. Equally, you can fill spirit into a very, very poor quality cask and leave it there for 60 years. But if it's a poor cask that you started out with, it doesn't automatically make that a good whiskey just because it's been in that cask for 60 years. Over my time at Edgington, nosing whiskies that have gone into blends, 3-year-old whiskies, I've come across 3-year-old whiskies that have been matured in a first fill cask that I would gladly drink as a single cask product, because the colour and flavour that you've got coming through, and so especially the intensity of some of the flavour, is just fantastic. So, you know, why tie yourself to saying, oh, you know, I don't want to do, I think that's an inferior product because it doesn't say that it's got been in a cask for a certain number of years. As I say, something that's been in a good quality cask for a short period of time can be just as good.
Awesome. And you said it as beautifully. I heard Bruichladdich, Jim McEwen, I believe, and he had some choice words about age statement whiskeys that I absolutely loved. And you and Margaret put it in a much more delicate, approachable way.
Yeah, no, my words of advice would definitely be, don't get hung up on it. If something tastes good, it tastes good. It doesn't matter about the number of years it's marked on the bottle.
Super good. And it's the same thing with distillation. People talk about pot stills and people talk about column stills. You know what? If the person operating the still knows what they're doing and they understand distillation, it's really not going to matter, which is, yeah, it's just the eye of the beholder and the person that's actually using it.
And that's ultimately what it comes down to as well, is its individuality and its personal taste. Something that you might think is a really good whiskey is might not necessarily what I think is a really good whiskey, because your taste differs from mine. And again, in terms of the work that I've done surrounding sensory, you know, that's one of the key things that we understand from it is sensory is such a difficult thing to work with, obviously, and working with sensory panels, because people do vary in their sensitivity to different smells and different tastes. And one of the best ways I think to exemplify that is curry. You know, you get some people out there who really like the hottest curries that there is going, love a vindaloo, love everything that's associated with sort of really hot chili peppers and things like that, really hot spices. And then you get other people who really don't have a palate that like these types of flavors. And I definitely fall into that category of preferring these milder type flavors when it comes to curry. Because, you know, for me, you end up losing a sense of taste altogether when you move into those hot. But that just comes down to that individual variation and the different sensitivities that we have to different smells. So, you know, I might give you a whiskey and you might pick up, you know, some really specific characters, and then I might nose it, and there'll be some things that I share with it, but there might be something else really personal that I get in it. And again, a lot of it comes across in the language of whiskey as well, and the terms that we use. And one of the great examples, I think, is a few people that I've spoken to when we've been doing nosing tests. I've got these small pots that have got individual aromas in them. And some people open this one particular pot and they say, it always reminds me of my granny's house and visiting my grandparents, in particular, sort of maybe going into her wardrobe, and the smell just reminds them of it. And the smell is always lavender. And it's because you get these lovely little lavender scented sachets that you hang up in your wardrobe and you're putting in your drawer to keep your clothes smelling fresh. And it is often associated with elderly people, but people will have that association and they'll know it reminds them of their granny, but they might not necessarily be able to put their name on the exact floral aroma that it's lavender. And everybody's got that own personal association with a lot of aromas. You know, it could be when you're talking about vanilla, it could be about a specific type of ice cream that you love, or maybe a milkshake that you've tasted in a really good diner or something like that. Or a particular boiled sweet that maybe reminds you of time that you spent with a person. And it's these personal associations that we have to different flavors that I think really makes, you know, food tasting and drink tasting in general, but very much for whiskey, something so individual. And it's why I think there's whiskey out there for everybody, and it's just finding something that really suits your palate and what you like.
Absolutely, drink what you like. And there's that forensics degree coming in solid. So if you ever want to look at your degree and justify it, that right there. And and also only that that mindset of I like what you like, and you might like what you like. Well, we could talk about it and see why. We could use that in a lot of other places in the world right now. So yeah, that's a good way of putting something. So when someone tastes Naked Grouse for the first time, what do you want them to say about that product? What is your message to them as you are blending away on the bench, as you said, with your 5 comrades?
Well, the main thing is I would really hope that they would enjoy it, because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's why we make whiskey. It's for people to enjoy it and take pleasure from drinking it. When we make Naked Grouse at the bench, we're really looking to get a lovely, rich flavour coming through in it. We're looking to get a lovely balance, though, of that fruity vanilla flavour that we get from American casks, balanced together with a little bit of that dried fruit and spice character that we get from the European casks. But really, all together, it gives you that nice rounded whiskey that's lovely and intense in character, but actually ultimately gives you a really versatile drink at the end of the day. So when it comes to whiskey, a lot of people really have that mindset of, whiskey is maybe a drink for an older generation. When you hear people talking about whiskey, you see a lot of people that drink whiskey either just neat or on ice or with just a small dash of water in it. But what we're trying to do with Naked Grouse is open it up to a new generation of whiskey drinkers. We want people who have never tried drinking Naked Grouse to try it, first of all. If you try it neat and you think, oh, that's maybe a little bit too much for me, the flavours are too intense, maybe you think it's too strong. Because another thing I think with particular people who are new to drinking in the whiskey category, sometimes drinking whiskey is really different from how you drink other drinks. If you think about maybe things like gin is obviously huge at the moment. Rum is a category that's coming up all the time. Even things, like vodka. A lot of these drinks, these spirits are drunk with a mixer. Whereas to go from drinking something like that to trying whiskey neat, it's a hugely different way of drinking a spirit. So we would actually encourage people to say, well, try whiskey, but maybe think about mixing it like you would with other spirits. So try ways of doing that. Another thing that you'll see Henry, our brand ambassador, doing so much of the time these days is making a cocktail with Naked Grouse. And I'm sure you and Henry have swapped a lot of stories on different naked cocktails. Our naked sour serve is really fantastic. Again, you're taking Naked Grouse, you're balancing a little bit of that sour, often citrus characters with that sweetness as well. So we really encourage people and try to make a product that's versatile and allows people to drink it in a way that suits them. And again, that falls into the whole wider idea of the Naked brand and our ethos and really enjoying things your way. You drink your whiskey, again, how you enjoy it and with the flavors that suit you and your personal taste.
Absolutely. And it's the experimental whiskey. You can like it any which way that you like. Just try it neat, try it in a cocktail, whichever way. But it's funny to hear you say that, because going back to our launch, which was last year in New York here, and everyone's saying like, oh no, this is great. Oh, what you having? I have a highball. I love it. Great. How are you drinking? Oh, I love it. I'm just neat. Yeah. Oh, I love this too. It's on the rocks. Oh, I had the Rob Roy with it. It's great. It's so funny because everyone was drinking it in a different way. We had our cocktails that we wanted people to try, that we know we're showcasing the brand. Our good buddy Bobby Burns from the Astorian in Astoria whipped up some amazing cocktails with it. But everyone enjoyed it, and when you see a distributor, there's every demographic possible there, and everyone's going to enjoy that spirit in a different way. And each way that they were drinking it, everyone enjoyed it. So it is cool, and I'm a huge fan, and the brand message in itself as well. Like I said, my quarantine cocktail shirt was the premise of the Naked brand, and I love making all those fun puns with the Naked brand for throughout that series too. So it's a brand I definitely play around with.
Yeah, I think it's as I say, for me, the whole idea of the brand, sits really comfortably with me. And just the fact that, as I say, we encourage people to celebrate freedom to be who they really are. And if that means breaking convention and what people typically expect of you, then so be it.
Absolutely. And I tell people all the time, I've never been ashamed of who I am as a person. I'm a geek. I'm a big meathead geek. I have a Star Wars tattoo. I am the first one to see any Avengers movie, and I love pro wrestling. So that's just me. So when I'm going on cell calls and I tell people like, oh, what does naked mean? I'm like, well, it doesn't mean you're actually fully nude. Like, me drinking naked is at home with a pro wrestling shirt, my dog in my lap, playing video games. That's me naked. That's what I do. And I love that brand message, and resonates so much with people. It's fantastic. So what is your living naked? What does living naked mean to you?
What does living naked mean to me? Well, a huge part of who I am really is whiskey. You know, I spend, well, the past few years I've very much, I say, lived and breathed it. When I took the job with Edrington 3 years ago, I worked here in Glasgow, but at the time I lived through in Edinburgh. So I commuted back and forth between Edinburgh and Glasgow every day, which would be sort of a total journey time each day of maybe around about 2.5 to 3 hours. So I found that my life very much became consumed by whiskey. But for me, that meant that, you know, well, whiskey is part of who I am, is very much what I feel, that I enjoy what I do, and I don't necessarily feel like it's work. But when I do step away from the bench, for me, it's about spending time with friends and family. Particularly my family, and quite a few of my friends are back up in Speyside, where I'm originally from, which is about 3.5 hours away from me here in Glasgow. So for me to be able to spend that time, it's about going away from the city. To me, living in the city, it's got a real buzz about it, which often at times is really exciting. Love going to bars and having that conversation, that buzz, but equally for me, I also like that literal freedom of escaping the city and sort of stepping back from life almost, and just winding down a little bit. And to me, that's going back to Speyside to see my family, visit friends, or going to visit friends that stay somewhere else. But always being me and spending time with the people who accept me for who I am.
That's awesome. There's only so many times you go to Devil's Advocate and Lady Libertine as well. It's like that's old, I'm sure. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. And that's, I think, the perfect way to live naked is surrounded by people that love you and that you love. So that's perfect.
Yeah, and it is at times like this, and the whole situation that we find ourselves in, with COVID-19, it's hard. You know, being away from my family during this time has been exceptionally difficult, and I'm exceptionally grateful for technology that we have nowadays that's allowed me to stay in touch with people. I mean, some weeks I often think my social calendar is busier now when we're in lockdown than it normally is.
That's fantastic.
Often thinking, who have I got a video call with tonight? Who am I speaking to tonight? But yeah, I think it's really important to stay in touch with these people. You know, through all of this, I've had my ups and downs, my stresses and my worries about things. You know, there's days where, you know, you'll either be inundated with things in the office, maybe things aren't quite going right, and you know, I'll come home at the end of the day and have a meltdown about it. But I then go and, you know, phone one of my friends or speak to somebody. I can rant and get it off my chest, or just completely forget about it and talk about something else entirely. But it's only through doing that that I'll undoubtedly come out the end of that call feeling a lot better about something, and having moved on and left all that stresses and worries behind. And as I say, I think more than ever, it's so important that we do that, and we feel that we're able to talk to people about how we're feeling.
Absolutely. I can't wait to give people hugs in person.
Yeah.
That's what I miss most. Yesterday I was blessed. It was Father's Day here in the States, but I was blessed to go out and see my whole family, and just that little time, man, one day just being around people. It's just amazing, and you need that. And a few drams were shared, so that always helps. And I think that's a big statement of what Naked is from a brand. Like, besides the malts, the oak, the team, all that goes into it, that's really what Naked stands for. I think is what really sets it aside from other brands. Would you agree with that?
Yep, absolutely. It's, you know, it's all those elements. It's everything that goes into it, from the different malts that we use to create it, the, you know, the wood that we mature it in, which obviously contributes so much to what it is. It's the quality as well, as I say, that level of detail and attention we pay to it all the way through the process. And then team, but not only in terms of the blending team that's required to actually make the product. You know, there's the rest of the Naked team right across the globe as well, who are such an important part of getting our product out there to the consumer. Not only the product, but the message of the brand as well. So it's very much a team effort that it takes in order to get Naked out there.
And from the boots on the ground team, we love it and enjoy it, and we're getting it out there for you as well.
And that's what I love the most, is when I talk, because in my role, I don't often necessarily talk to the markets that much. But during the month of May, I spent quite a bit of time with the global brands team. And I was in touch with lots of different markets. I met a lot of people from the different markets that we work with. And there's just so many people across the globe, you know, a couple of pockets in particular, people that are so enthusiastic. And I feel just absolutely get the Naked brand 100%. And that I find is just really exciting. People who are completely on board with it, and people who feel that and have that enthusiasm for the brand absolutely put it across so well to the consumer as well.
It's fun. It's super fun, and not only that, it's just delicious. So yep, we're all excited for it. So besides responsibly, because we all have to consume responsibly, what is the best tips that you would give to a seasoned consumer or a new consumer on how to enjoy the Naked Grouse?
So this probably comes back to our idea of versatility, and it's how you enjoy it. One of the first things I would recommend, though, is just to try Naked Grouse as it is. So try it neat. It might not be for you, or if you're very new to drinking whiskey, you might find the flavours really quite different from what you're used to trying. But what I would recommend is put a little bit in a glass, have a nose of it, have a little sip of it, and see what you think of it.
I'm going to take that advice.
I've got a bottle here as well, so
I have it up here.
I'll share it in you in this one.
Yeah, excellent. It's a little later for you than it is for me, but
yeah, this is definitely a nightcap for me.
You can never say you've been drinking all day, though, if you don't start early. So. And I agree. Just having it right all neat is the way to do it.
So, I mean, again, when you're talking to people about drinking whiskey, a lot of people say, look for really specific things and how to nose it, and how some people, when they're nosing things, they'll put one nostril in and then another nostril. When I'm drinking whiskey for enjoyment, I just pop my nose straight into the glass.
And I'm just drinking it.
So yeah, I would pour it out at full strength. So that here in the UK, that's 40% that it's bottled at. Some markets will get it at 43%, depending on where you are in the world. So yeah, I would start with getting it at 40%, have a bit of a nose of it, sometimes swirl it around the glass, so get some of those aromas coming out a bit more, and then have a taste of it. Again, for me, some flavors that immediately pop through in the palate there are a lovely sweetness straight away. I also get quite a orchard fruits, a bit like an apple in there as well.
I got the sweetness and a hint of that cherry right away.
Yeah.
The apple icy.
And as I say, what I really love about it is it gets that really nice balance. You've got that lovely sweetness that comes through, but then you'll get those slightly more richer dried fruit, spicy type character that comes in it as well from the European casks. What I would then recommend doing, either if you find it 40% is quite strong, is to add a bit of water to it. So again, some people quite frown on adding water to your whiskey. I personally really like water with whiskey in it. I think different whiskies take water slightly differently. When we nose whiskey at the bench, as a general rule, we will add a bit of water to it to bring it down to approximately 20% in strength. And one of the reasons for that is we're quite often nosing a lot of samples at one time, which means that you can get sensory fatigue if you're nosing them all at 40%. So we tend to add a little bit of water, bring it down to 20%. But what that also does is it takes away the alcohol burn of the whiskey and allows you to get to some of the flavours that are underneath the alcohol there. So as I say, when you're bringing it down to 20%, you're pretty much half and half your whiskey and water. But if I'm drinking it for pleasure, then I tend to add slightly less than that. And again, just take a nose of it. And as I say, that I'll dampen down the alcohol, burn a bit, and I'll let you to get to some of the flavours that are underneath it. And then again, it just takes the edge off the palate as well. It just takes away that slight burn.
I like the whiskey without the water for this one.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna walk you through it. I'm gonna walk with you with it. But I have been. I won't lie though. I'm a huge fan of highballs now. Hello, Zach Berger, if you're watching. So I enjoy just club soda. So 2 ounces of the whiskey, good old club soda, maybe a little bit of lime sometimes, maybe a little bit of lemon sometimes, but with that, and it does open it up, and you do get spirit. I'm a Highland Park guy, so if you can't tell from my top shelf.
I'll tell Gordon.
That's so cool that you said that. But yeah, you stumped me, and I love talking. I don't even know how to come back. That is just such a cool comment to hear. But but you do get the smoke coming off of it. You do get the sherry. You get it's so much fun. So that's normally my go-to. Nice Highland Park 12 highballs. But and again, you do, even with this, I've had Naked Grouse highballs as well. That's just what I like to go to. And you do get that. You do get a great, serious fanboy alert on that one, Tommy. I lit up like a little kid. Did you see that? But I love Naked Grouse highballs. I really do. It's a little lighter, and it just allows you to keep on going through with it. You can literally drink them all night, which is great. So I'm a big fan of adding water.
To be honest, it was actually how I started drinking whiskey, was as highballs. It was normally a blended Scotch, normally Famous Grouse, or at the time as well, we had Cutty Sark in the portfolio. And I worked on Cutty Sark as well. So, a Famous Grouse and ginger ale with fresh lime wedges in it, something quite similar, simple, but it's
all
just
day.
Fantastic. You get these really fresh flavors, but there's also that whiskey underneath. And I think particularly for people who are maybe new to drinking whiskey, maybe want to ease themselves gently into drinking whiskey and get used to that whiskey flavor before they start drinking whiskey neat. It's a great way to start, thinking about the different flavors that you see from whiskey combined with something else. And then, as I say, cocktails are such a huge part of Naked Grouse as well, that there is no limits to what you can try Naked Grouse in cocktail wise.
Absolutely. It's funny, Jack and Ginger was my first drink, Jack Daniels and ginger ale. And I like to say that's my wedding drink, because you really can't get many good spirits at weddings or good cocktails at weddings. So Jack and Ginger was always my go-to. Yeah. And I do have kind of a Highland Park tattoo. I got a Valkyrie there for you, Tojo. So I don't know if that's the same deal, but I got somewhat of a Viking of a Highland Park tattoo. But that's it. I agree. And again, the Rob Roy's with it, Manhattan's with it, anything. It's a versatile spirit. It's so much fun to play around with in drinks. For the accounts that I've given it to, I'm like, just play, see what happens with it. There's really nothing else like it. There's other great blended scotches that people are using for cocktails, Monkey Shoulder being one of them. It's a fantastic spirit. Ours is just a little different. It's a lot of fun to play around with. So just get involved. And everyone that does it comes up with something that's a gem. It comes up with something delicious. So it's definitely a great spirit to play around with. And bartenders appreciate that for sure.
Super. And I'm more than willing to be a sort of taste tester for any of those cocktails that anybody wants to try.
Oh, there we go. We got to get you to New York then, or I'll come out to Edinburgh, whichever way the company wants to agree on this. Let's make it happen.
That works for me.
But I know that it's late near you, and I really, really appreciate your time. This was so cool. And this is honestly one of the coolest things that I've done at Edrington, just being able to sit down and chat with you and understand the spirit in depth, and your wealth of knowledge in terms of whiskey and blended scotch. I truly, truly, truly appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks very much, Tommy. It's been an absolute pleasure. As I said, I love whiskey, and I'll happily talk about it all day. So
fantastic.